Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 823. My opponent started off with e4, and I went with d5, the Scandinavian defense. Yeah, let's put up the opening book. And you can see the main move is just to take, and then I play the second choice here. Instead of taking with the queen, I play knight f6, which leaves white with a number of options. d4 is the most common move and probably the best, but this is also a very interesting kind of sideline. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the fifth choice. Knight f3, knight c3, and d4 are all good, sound developing moves. I think those are all playable. c4 is a gambit line that allows me to play c6, which is a good gambit for black. White can decline the gambit by following up c4 with d4 and get into a Panov-Botvinnik attack, actually. But that's okay as well. Anyway, so this bishop b5 check is different from the other line, so gets it into kind of unique channels, and that leaves white with some edge here, but playable for black as well. So you need to block the check, and it makes sense to block it with the bishop so as not to if the knight blocks and the bishop is trapped on the c8 square. So it makes sense to block with the bishop. And then white moves the bishop. White is not interested in trading that bishop. He could defend it, of course. So if he doesn't want to trade, then he just has to retreat. And the two retreats are either bishop c4 or bishop e2. And the idea, well, with bishop c4, black is going to play the check. And so I suppose the idea of bishop e2 is to avoid the check, and then the bishop goes to f5. So anyway, there's this funny dance with the bishops. So he chose the bishop c4 line. I go bishop g4. And, you know, I don't see this very often in practice. I play the Scandinavian fairly often, but I think I've only seen this once in an over-the-board game. And I didn't know what to play, so I didn't play this particular line and got a bad position. But this is okay. But I'm not familiar with this position, I guess, is my point. And my next move, bishop h5, is actually a mistake. The bishop really needs to stay on this diagonal because there's some lines where this d7 square needs to be defended. So the bishop should really go to f5 here. And let's see, the line might go like this. g4, kicking the bishop is possible now or later. You know, the one thing you have to ask is, what if white tries to hold on to the pawn? And then you can play knight b to d7 with the idea of knight coming to b6 and getting the pawn back. And also, let's see, let's check. Did I write this down? Yeah, c6 here, which is also in the opening book, is a reasonable gambit as well. So you can play that either way, either with c6 or knight b d7. But anyway, in the game, I went with bishop to h5, and now we're just out of the opening book. And now if he were to hold on to the pawn with knight c3, this is probably how white should have played. It's not so easy for me to get the pawn back. So, for example, knight b d7 with the idea of going to b6. You know, that c6 gambit is still available, but not as good as it is on the other line. So the bishop really just belongs on this diagonal, I guess. So let's see, g4, kicking the bishop back to g6, queen to e2, knight to b6, bishop b5 check. This shows why it would have been useful to have the bishop here. After this bishop b5 check, I have to move a knight to block the check. And so this is a good position for white. White has managed to hold on to the pawn for the moment, and my pieces are a bit tied up. So that's why in this position, after that f3 move, you have to drop the bishop back to f5, stay on that diagonal. So that's your opening lesson for this video. Anyway, so I made a mistake, but my opponent didn't punish me. He played knight to e2, and so I just get the pawn back. And so there's a comfortable position, still with an edge to white, typical opening advantage. He castles, play e6, and he goes c3. I think c3 is an actual mistake, not just missing an opportunity here, but kind of a move that doesn't do a whole lot. And after that, actually, the advantage, well, black is equal at least after c3. You know, if he wants to build up to d4, there's no need for that. He can just play d4 right away. So c3 is kind of a wasted move. It gets in the way of the knight, and it doesn't help play d4 since d4 could be played anyway. So c3, just a weak move. Let's see, I go bishop d6. He goes d4, castle. So normal developing moves. He goes knight to g3, kicking my bishop, drop it back. He goes knight to e4, decent post for his bishop, or for his knight hitting my bishop. I drop my bishop back. Still, this is a position where the computer likes black a little bit over white. I think, you know, white's king side is a little bit funny with this pawn on f3. And his pieces are maybe not the most actively placed. But his next move is actually a blunder, and I failed to take advantage of it. So here's your chance. Spot the tactic. Shouldn't be too hard, but if you need a second to figure it out, you can go ahead and pause the video here. Okay, yeah, the obvious tactic. I don't know why I didn't play this. I just was thinking about other things. Kind of problem I often have in chess. I'm not really surveying the whole board and thinking about all the things that I might do. I'm just thinking about particular plans that I have in mind and how to follow up on them. But of course, you should always have your eyes open for sudden, unexpected opportunities that pop up like this. It's just a fork, and that wins the exchange. So that would have been an easy way to get a pretty big edge. So I didn't do that. I was just continuing with my development. And let's see, what did he do? He did rook e1. Yeah, so the opportunity is gone after he played rook e1. Yeah, he didn't, when he played knight bd2, he didn't really need to play knight bd2. He could have played rook e1 right here and knight bd2 later, and he would have been fine. I mean, like I said, it still was a position where white had, black had some slight edge, but white is okay as well. But yeah, knight bd2 allows a tactic. Knight to d7 allows him to get away with it, and the game continues with slight edge to black. So I play c5 here. He goes knight f1, sort of ignoring this for the moment and getting his knight over here. So it allows me to give him an isolated pawn. He could take with the queen if he wanted to avoid that, but I don't know, the queen might be a little vulnerable there. I would probably follow up with knight to f6 and then try to trade and get a bishop on this diagonal. So taking with a pawn is probably reasonable, but it gives me a target for the rest of the game, or most of the rest of the game. So let's see. I went rook to c8. The chess engine right here likes knight to f6 better, but rook c8 is okay as well. Let's see. He dropped his bishop back to b3. By the way, yeah, the chess engine thinks he should really just take here, and let's back up. He should really just take here and go for this ram structure. I thought this would be an okay version of the ram structure for me. Let's see, his knight has to move, say knight c3, and then I can go knight to b6, staying out of the way of the bishop and defending the center. You know, this bishop can come here. I have active pieces, and this bishop is not trapped behind the pawn. So I thought this would be a good structure for black, but the chess engine says it's just equal. So I probably have to agree with that or go along with that. Anyway, he decided not to go that way, but keep his bishop. He dropped back here. Let's see, I went knight to f6 now. He went knight to g3, and I took on e4. He took back, and I went knight to f6. So let's see, and he went bishop to f4. Yeah, and this is another interesting point in the game. I was not sure about continuing to take. I mean, that was definitely an idea here that I thought about. It gives him these two pawns at the center, which are, you know, somewhat imposing looking, but they're also subject to counterattacks. And the chess engine says that's the best way to play. Take the knight, and he should take back with the pawn. Well, he has to, I guess, because the bishop is on that square. So I'm doing that exchange at a moment when he has to take back with the pawn. And then, well, bishop to b4. So the pawn is under fire. I'm hitting the rook. The rook moves to e3. I suppose that's a little more active than blocking with this dark squared bishop. And then the bishop drops back to a5, maybe with the idea of coming around here and targeting the d-pawn next. So it seems like the chess engine has the opinion these two pawns in the center are more of a weakness for white than a strength. this is the kind of thing that's really difficult for me to assess during a game, especially a blitz game. But anyway, that's an interesting piece of information there, some kind of thing, something to keep in mind. You know, giving your opponent a big center just to try and undermine it, a typical hyper-modern strategy. It seems like it would work pretty well here. Probably it's especially because the C pawn and the F pawn are both missing, so you don't have pawns to support the center, and you just have those two center pawns hanging out there by themselves, and they come under fire. They're not the classical hanging pawns. Classical hanging pawns are the C pawn and the D pawn, but it's kind of similar to that. Anyway, I went queen b6 here, looking to pin this pawn and just try and get some action against it. Let's see, he went bishop e5, defending the pawn. So I went rook fd8, goes king h1, unpinning. I went knight d5, queen e2, so I think some fairly normal moves. He's getting away from any tactics on the d file. And now f6. The chess engine did not like f6, and in fact, I mean, it thinks black has an edge here, and it thinks f6 gives it away, basically. And as we saw in the game, I don't actually win the pawn because he gets my weakened in d pawn. I even wondered at some point whether white had some tactic that would give white an edge, but it seems like the best white can do here is equalize after f6. But I can keep an edge with this move knight b4. So knight b4, say rook a to d1, just centralizing, and the knight back to c6. So it's not about the b4 square, it's actually about repositioning the knight to a square where it puts more pressure on the center, and also is taking a look at this bishop. So this f6 move is interesting, but just doesn't quite work tactically. Let's see, he drops his bishop back, that's correct, and I grab the pawn. In fact, the chess engine says the best way for me to keep an edge here is to unpin here, not worry about grabbing that pawn, but maybe going after it later. And so that would keep some kind of edge for black. After these two moves, f6 and queen d4, then white is basically equalized. And there's different ways for white to play it. The chess engine likes the immediate knight c3, but it seems like we get a similar kind of position. He goes rook a d1 first, kicking my queen back. Then he goes knight to c3, putting pressure on the center and opening up this attack on the e6 square. So I saw this was coming, and I also noticed after this knight is traded off, the bishop here is loose. So it looks like there's, there might be some tactic here that wins a piece, but it seems to be not the case. I guess, yeah, the chess engine just did not find a way for white to come out ahead, so it seems like it just comes out even. So I guess we played this part okay. Let's see, I took his knight. He took on e6. Oh, well, the chess engine had a suggested improvement here with bishop takes. Bishop takes e6, check. King h8. It looks like that wins the exchange, but remember his rook is hanging. And let's see, he takes my knight. Then I can trade rooks here. And then I can bring my rook away from his bishop, hitting the queen. And I can drop my bishop back. I guess this is maybe a little better for black than a little better for white than the other line. But basically the material is even, and it's a very similar pawn structure to what we get in the game. So it's not that different. It's just that my pieces are slightly less active. So that's why that's a better approach. Let's see. He went with the queen check. Well, he still had the queens on, so maybe that helped too. He got the queens off first, then went for this check. And here, I guess maybe this is the reason. Actually, bishop f7 would have been a better reply than moving the king away. So bishop f7, let's see, he can take the rook. He can take the knight. I take the bishop. He takes back. And then I get my king here. And so it's rook and bishop versus rook and bishop. Notice the bishops are the same color, and white has the weaker pawn structure. So black has the advantage. Compared to the game, though, my king is more active. I get my king to the center quicker. And so actually the chess engine gives a decent edge to black in that line. So after the check, when I ran away with my king, actually is setting up a slightly worse endgame for me than what I could have had with bishop f7. So anyway, he trades. We get a very similar kind of position. He takes, I take, he takes the knight, and I go bishop c5, and that kind of ends the complication. So it's similar to what we just saw, but both pairs of bishops are on the board instead of just one pair, and my king is all the way over in the corner. So those are slight pluses to white compared to the previous position. And I still have the same structural advantage, which is my pawn structure is better. He's got two isolated pawns. So overall, this position is a slight edge to black, but not very much. Anyway, the game continues like that for a while. So let's just go forward. And now we are getting to the point where we're running low on time. And this results in the horrible series of blunders. I keep some sort of slight edge through most of this, basically, up until this point here. And yeah, rook to f2 is a mistake. Just leaving the back rank. I had a bad feeling about it after I played it. But yeah, we were both low on time at this point, and so that's what happens. But the chess engine recommends keeping the rook on the back rank. I could play a move like this, rook to c8, chase the bishop back, and then bishop to b4, hitting his rook and trying to get pressure on this pawn. I actually thought of this idea, but I didn't see if I had anything great here after he defends the pawn. But I can still try and get something going with a move like b5. It's not clear if this is winning a pawn, but anyway, it's an idea of how I might have continued instead of directly playing rook f2. But right after I played this, yeah, I started to realize that there's some problems on the back rank. And in fact, white could force a draw at this point with the immediate rook to e8. It's not winning, but it is a draw. Say I grab the pawn. He can go for the check. And let's see, my king comes here. And then he comes back here. It's check. My king goes back. And there's no way out. And apparently there's nothing better after rook e8. I guess there's no way for me to avoid getting to a drawish kind of ending. I mean, in this position, my rook could come back here, and he could exchange it off. But I guess that's also drawing. Anyway, so rook f2 was a mistake. And then I guess his move, rook d1, was probably a mistake as well because he didn't go for the draw, and that's really the best he has at this point. Let's see, he played rook d1, hitting my bishop. And I played bishop e2. In fact, this gives me an edge. That really was a mistake. That gives me an edge because I'm hitting this pawn, and it's difficult for him to defend. Let's see, he played rook e1. I went ahead and grabbed the pawn. Let's see, he went bishop to g3, hitting my rook. Went ahead and grabbed here. He went bishop to b8. Looking at this pawn, which is defended, but I pushed it forward anyway, started moving those pawns forward. And now he plays rook to e8. And I'm still winning here, but I have to be very careful. And the move I played rook f2 with the idea that I could interpose the rook defended by my bishop. So that's what I was thinking when I played rook f2. But in fact, this move loses. So if you want to find the winning continuation for white, see if you can spot the win for white here. So a sudden losing move. Anyway, like I said, we were both low on time. But yeah, pause the video here and see if you can find it. It's a nice little mating pattern. Okay, anyway, here's the answer. I'm giving it away now. It's bishop to g8 check. King only has one move. And now the key idea is bishop to f7 check, which is a discovered check, so my king has to move, and at the same time it blocks my rook, so I no longer have that defense that I planned on of rook to f8. King only has one move, and then bishop to here is mate. So that is that's how to lose the game. Fortunately for me, he didn't spot that. He was in serious, even worse time trouble than I was. But anyway, the win, instead of playing rook f2, I could have just taken the h-pawn. There's no more mating threat, and my king can escape out through the g6 square. So simple win for me. Instead, I play a blunder that would lose, and he plays a blunder of not mating me. And instead he checks this way. And actually this is a little bit lucky too that I hadn't thought about this check. But But with my rook here on f2, I'm able to defend my bishop. So this blocks the check. He still had one last drawing chance. His bishop, if he just dropped his bishop back to d5, apparently in this case there's no way for me to avoid a draw here. So he still had one last drawing chance, but he just traded, and now it's just completely winning. So he just played on one or two more moves. Let's see, where did he go? He went rook e6, yeah, and I took off the h-pawn, and then he gave up because he has no more mating ideas, and I'm eventually going to just queen one of those pawns and checkmate him. Even at 4 seconds a move, I can do that much. So anyway, very entertaining game. Hope you liked the tactics quizzes, and I will see you again soon. Bye.